All right, so over in France, our union comrades are doing what they do best, and that is protesting and going on strike. And this one is an absolute doobie. Okay, so here from the Journal, they say 1.27 million people joined protests over French pension reforms, say officials. Okay, so we're going to get into more details here. I'll show you a little bit of the footage of what it's looking like on the ground right now, but essentially what it seems like this is revolving around is their neoliberal ghoul president Emmanuel Macron trying to implement raising the retirement age and basically imposing austerity on working class people who are trying to retire and enjoy the rest of their lives. And instead, he wants to raise that so that they can be good little cogs in the machine for just a couple more years so that the capitalist class can squeeze a little bit more out of them. And it seems like this has drummed up a significant amount of rage from the French people. So they say an estimated 1.27 million people took to the streets of French cities, towns, and villages today, according to the Interior Ministry, in new massive protests against the government's key pension reform plans. And they say the turnout exceeded participation in a previous round of strikes and protests against the proposed retirement age increase, in a significant victory for labor unions. So again, good little lesson here in terms of why I on this channel advocate for labor unions so frequently here in the United States. Obviously in France, they have a much higher union participation rate amongst their labor force. Here in the United States, we have had, again, decades of neoliberalism ushered in by the Reagan administration and carried on by Reagan 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0 and so on and so forth, to the point where we have had, again, a basically completely obliterated American labor movement. So we've seen sort of a somewhat of a revitalization of this labor movement over the last couple of years with Starbucks and Amazon and all of these other union drives that have been taking place. But this is the power of unionization, okay? Engaging in collective action with your fellow workers in order to make demands either from the corporation that you happen to be working for or from the government figures or politicians who represent a lot of those corporations, okay? So again, good little lesson here that we could learn in the United States. But they continue saying that the 8 unions organizing the protests promptly announced that they would organize new demonstrations on the 7th and 11th of February. So looking forward to see what that looks like. They say the powerful CGT union claimed that 2.8 million protesters marched today, and the French government says that it is determined to push through Emmanuel Macron's election pledge to reform France's pension system, while strong popular resentment will be strengthened will strengthen efforts by labor unions and left-wing legislatures to block the bill, which would again raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Okay, so a couple different things here. Number one, they're saying the French government is going to force through this agenda item, which they are then subsequently admitting basically in the same sentence is seemingly overwhelmingly unpopular among the French people. It's like, okay, fantastic democracy that we have going on here, where you're basically just enforcing, again, this neoliberal austerity on the populace who do not want that to take place, right? So you would think that maybe they would take a listen to these people, but it seems like they're really trying to, make this as quick as possible and shove this through so that they can get to the other side of this. But a little bit more information here from the BBC's take on this. They say French protests intensify against the pension age rise, and they start here saying that France has seen a second wave of protests and strikes against the president Emmanuel Macron's plan to raise the retirement age, and anti-government cortèges were as loud and as big, if not louder and bigger, than on the first day of action. So it doesn't seem like this is necessarily going to be going anywhere soon. And they say the Interior Ministry says that more than, again, 1.27 million people protested, a higher figure than 12 days ago, and 8 key unions took part in the strike, which disrupted schools, public transport, and oil refineries. So we have multiple different sort of sectors of the economy that are all joining together and fighting collectively for roughly the same goal. And specifically, I'll give a shout out here to Breaking Points. Obviously, I joined that team as a producer recently, but over on Breaking Points, Max Alvarez of the Real News Network, he does great reporting on labor issues. He recently did an interview for us on the channel where he actually did a conversation with one of the key figures throughout these protests, and he basically breaks down exactly what they are fighting for in that video. So I'll link that down in the description if you want to go take a look at that. But it was a super interesting conversation that they ended up having. But they continue here in this article saying that Mr. Macron's government government is pushing ahead with its pension age reforms in the face of opinion polls that suggest 2/3 of voters are opposed to the changes. 2/3. Okay, so basically a supermajority are opposed to this policy, and they're still trying to force it through. I mean, it's completely insane here. But they said that they're going to begin the passage through the National Assembly next week. So hopefully these protests do end up heating up, and they can prevent this before they try to sneak it through here. But they say without a majority in parliament, the government will have to rely on the right-wing Republicans for support as much as the ruling party's own MPs. Okay, so a very classic phenomenon here under capitalist so-called democracies, where you have conservatives teaming up with neoliberal ghouls in order to enforce austerity on working class people, essentially at the behest of the corporations that run a lot of these countries and governments. But they continue down here saying that a report indicated that 11,000 police were deployed to cover the demonstrations taking place in more than 200 towns and cities. So of course, the police being their, good little lapdogs for these corporations, for the capitalist class in whatever country that you want to talk about. They are essentially the vanguard, whether it's for corporate America or a lot of these oligarchs in France as well. But they say that some skirmishes were reported at the end of the Paris route in Place Vauban, and 30 people were arrested, and the Interior Minister praised police for their handling of the protests, because of course he did. And we got a quote here from, according to the BBC, the far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came pretty close to entering the final round of the elections in France's most recent presidential contest. But he said Mr. Macron is certain to lose, so coming out on the side of these unions here. And he says nobody wants his reforms, and the more the days go by, the greater the opposition to them. Okay, so base take there from Mélenchon. And they say there was also evidence that while raising the state pension age was a unifying call to arms, people were turning out for wider reasons. Again, you have, multiple different sectors of the economy that are taking part in this protest. I'm sure that it's not just specifically about the raising of the retirement age. It's probably a multitude of different factors that are playing into this, but it seems like, as I just pointed out, that's sort of the main thing that people are rallying around each other for. But they finish off here saying that France's opposition, fearing that they will end up winning all of the battles but not the war, may decide to escalate the dispute. So watch out for open-ended strikes at fuel depots, for example, or targeted power cuts. Okay, and so we're going to circle back around to this here in a second, because this is probably my favorite part about this entire strike, the targeted power cuts. But they say so far the protests have been good-humored, whatever that means, and generally peaceful. And as long as that remains the case, the government can ride out the opposition movement and see its bill quickly through Parliament. So according to the BBC here, it almost looks like they're advocating for them to significantly escalate these protests. And if they don't, then basically they're saying that the government is going to very quickly force this through their parliamentary legislative procedures. But they say if the economy starts hurting, things change. And if the protests turn violent, things change too. So, on this channel, I'm never going to advocate for violence or anything like that, but take the BBC's word, okay? So here we got a little bit of video of what just some of these protests. Again, this was over dozens and dozens of different cities and towns and villages across the country, but here's just a little glimpse into what this was looking like on the ground. God, man, it just makes me honestly very jealous that we can't have something like this here in the United States. Right now we are literally in the middle of having a fight over the debt ceiling between Democrats and Republicans, where the Republicans' main ask is that they want to slash Social Security and Medicare. They'll obviously come out and deny that and say, oh no, we're actually trying to protect it in the long run by making some of these cuts or adjustments or whatever the argument may be on any given day. But this is a similar fight to what we're facing right now in the United States, and it would just be absolutely beautiful to see millions of people taking to the streets to oppose this type of action, and using direct action as a strategy in order to try to oppose a lot of the austerity measures that Americans have been facing for a long time in this country. But again, here's the best part of this entire series of events, at least according to what I saw. So here from the Wall Street Journal, they say French union cuts power to pressure Macron on pensions. They say targeted outages aimed at politicians and the wealthy wealthy draw warnings of legal sanctions. Okay, so essentially it looks like these top unions that work at a lot of these energy firms are basically trying to do targeted cuts specifically at politicians and the wealthy elites within France in order to apply pressure to them. Absolutely amazing, absolutely perfect strategy here. And as they are doing that to try to, put a little bit of pressure on the ruling class in their country, they're also doing this. They say here from TRT World, French Energy Union distributes free gas in protest over pension reforms. Okay, so they say several hospitals and clinics, municipal skating rinks and swimming pools, public sports centers, libraries, middle schools, high schools, nurseries, collective heating of universities or HLMs, low rent housing, public lighting of small and medium-sized towns, and social housing have received free electricity or gas, according to this top union. Okay, so cutting power to politicians and the wealthy billionaires and billionaires within their country and giving free energy to things like schools and community centers and social housing projects, all of that. Amazing, okay? Again, we could learn some valuable lessons from these types of protests, but we're going to finish off here. They say energy workers protesting the reform also placed small businesses such as bakeries on reduced tariffs, and they say these actions of Robin Hood of the energy have only started, and honestly, you can only hope that that's true and that they do end up winning this fight at the end of the day. So obviously they said February 7th, February 11th, there are going to be some more protests in regards to this, so I'll keep you guys updated on what we see in the future. But again, the fundamental lesson here, in my opinion, is just the power of unions. Okay, if you do not have union representation, as the vast majority of workers in the United States do not, then you are essentially by yourself. Your boss, your CEO, your executives, the board of directors can decide to make whatever decisions that they want for the company, including cutting your wages, diminishing your working conditions, cutting your benefits, firing you, etc., with essentially no democratic pushback whatsoever on a system that is inherently authoritarian like capitalism. Okay, so the value of unions is that you get together with your workers, you are able to apply collective pressure and actually make demands from the capitalist class or from corrupt politicians. And obviously this could go one way or another. Maybe they get some of the extractions that they are asking for and they don't get other ones, but at the end of the day, you absolutely love to see it.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying